Thank you for that incredibly kind and overwhelming introduction. There's no pressure now or anything. Governor Cuomo, President Obama, Svante Myrick, that's how it goes, just like that. It is an absolute pleasure to be here today, here in New York City. And I've been waiting to make an announcement, and I think this is the perfect place to make it on stage here in front of all of you. I want to announce that I'm the only politician in New York State, seemingly. I want to announce right here, I'm not running for mayor of New York City. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Yes. Yes, it's true. Some of us aren't. At least one of us isn't. And I had a chance to meet Michael Bloomberg last year, or as we in Ithaca call him, that other guy. And I distinctly remember our meeting because he had the same reaction that quite a lot of folks have. When we met and I walked in the room, he was visiting Ithaca. Somebody introduced us and he said, "This is the mayor of Ithaca." And he looked at me and said, what? And I said, "Hi, I'm Svante, I'm the mayor of Ithaca." And he goes, "I don't understand." And I get that a lot. I often get looks from people when I introduce myself as the mayor, particularly 2 years ago when I was elected. I was 24 years old. I was still a young man then. And they often look at me when I say I'm the mayor and they say, is there like a raffle? How do you do it in your city? Like you get a prize? Are you sure you know? They had the same question. They have the same question that Michael Bloomberg had. I tell them I was elected. I actually had, in Ithaca, this is very common. In Ithaca, I had a seven-way race. I won all 18 election districts, 55% of the vote, right? And we did that just through a ground campaign. Oh, thanks. Well, thank you very much. Yes, and I'm going to try to move quickly here because I want to get you out on time. But please, if ever you feel the need to interrupt me with spontaneous applause, wild cheers, I will break for that. So please feel free. But yes, thank you. See? Okay, yeah, what's up? Okay, now it sounds sarcastic now. The truth is, what they want to know, they don't want to know about the campaign. They want to know what? They want to know the story, right? That all-important story. That story is so important. It's not just for politicians, though it's incredibly important for politicians. It's important in the work that you do. How many times have you stayed up late writing a grant, or attempting to write a grant, that will convey not just the numbers, but the story that you hope to get across? How many times have you sat in a meeting with a mayor or with a city council member in a city council meeting and tried to get them to grasp that story? Why? It's because that's how we understand the world around us, is through stories. Right? And my own story is what folks often want to hear because they think it will help them understand how it is the young man who 20 years ago was living with his mother and his three siblings in our car. It was a Buick, so it was spacious, living in homeless shelters for months at a time, living for weeks at a time in hotels. Single hotel room for all five of us that was paid for by our church. And I'll tell you, there are two different ways to tell that story. There's the story of me, and I'll tell you that one first. And then there's the story of us, and that's the true story. But the story of me is the one that we're used to telling, because that's the American way of telling stories. The story of a self-made man, right? The Horatio Alger type story. Somebody who pick themselves up by their own bootstraps. And this is a very appealing and attractive story, and in fact, it's the way we're used to telling and hearing our stories. It's the kind of stories we like. It's particularly the kind of stories that politicians like to tell. As James Carville once said, that every politician wants you to believe that he was born in a log cabin, that he built himself. It's true. Have you heard some of those in this campaign? Have you heard some of those stories so far? Yeah, it's always very exciting. I tell you, that story, the story of me, starts again with that 6-year-old who, despite the challenges of not knowing where they were going to sleep in any given night, went to school dutifully, did his work, excelled through sheer force of personality and wit and charm, and intelligence and looks and on and on. Trying to catch myself. It's a trip. Excelled so much that he became the first person in his small village of Earlville, 800 people, where I grew up, to go on to an Ivy League school, to go to Cornell University, where I then worked 3 part-time jobs to pay my way through Cornell. While at the same time, as a junior, not only was I working those 3 part-time jobs, but I became so active and involved in the community that a groundswell of support rose up to meet me and urge me to run for the city council at 20 years old and to get me elected, right? Becoming one of the youngest elected officials in United States history. And that same groundswell of support met me 4 years later at the expiration of my term, urging me not to run for re-election, but to run for the mayor's seat. And that same groundswell of folks, again overwhelmed by my wit, charm, and charisma, elected me and have propelled me in what we've accomplished over the last year and a half. And what have we accomplished over the last year and a half? When I was elected, I inherited a $3 million deficit, right? The largest in Ithaca's history. This is in a $60 million budget. We closed that deficit in my first budget through a first in 3 generations reformation of our city government. We streamlined, we merged 6 departments down into 3. We actually added new positions, we avoided layoffs, we refinanced our debt, we offered a retirement incentive, we spurred new growth, and we closed a $3 million deficit with the lowest tax increase in Ithaca in 15 years. And that's an appealing story. It's an appealing story to me because it makes me sound good. It's an appealing story because it's easy to tell, and it's easy to tell because it makes sense to us. And it makes sense to us in the way that we've always heard these stories, ever since grade school. We learn the story of America through these individuals. Right? I had the opportunity to speak at a local high school during Black History Month. And I asked the students, it's Black History Month, what are you learning about? And what do you think they said? Who do you learn about in Black History Month? Martin Luther King Jr. Isn't that incredible? And George Washington Carver, yeah. Isn't that incredible? One person. Black History Month, of all of the Black Americans and everything that they've accomplished, we whittle it down to that one person. And what did Dr. King do? He had a dream. He gave a speech. He gave a speech, and we got civil rights. It's a hell of a speech. Right? And then we learn about our presidents, the greatest presidents in our history. Who do we think of? Who's the first president you think of? Abraham Lincoln, right? So our greatest president. What did he do? What was he? He freed the slaves. How did he do that? He gave a speech. Hell of a speech. These speeches, powerful things. Before that, George Washington, the founder of our country, right? The father of democracy. Beat back the British, started our country, gave us liberty. It's incredible to lay all that on the feet of one person. Particularly when you look at the histories of these people, you see even Dr. King. He was a great man, but a flawed man, personally and professionally. He's somebody who gave everything, literally everything, to the cause, but he's not the only one. A cast of thousands of people fought for hundreds of years to deliver us civil rights. Most of them now anonymous, but without any single one of them, we would not be where we are today. Generations, centuries of people working together towards the same goal is the only reason we achieve, not because of this one person or this one speech. Same is true with Abraham Lincoln. Somebody with deep ambivalence, not about slavery, but about equality. Somebody who often wrote that he felt once the slaves were freed, the best course for America was to send all Black Americans back to Africa. Right? Again, somebody who was imperfect, but was able to achieve great things because of the generations of people who fought before him, abolitionists, both Black and white, to help end slavery. And George Washington himself was a great man and a great leader. The most famous image of him, of him crossing the Delaware at Christmas to surprise the British. You guys know this painting? Of him, and it's freezing and it looks cold. Go back and look at this painting, Google it. This is the only guy in the boat not doing any work, all right? He's standing, he's looking like this. There's plenty of oars, George, is all I'm saying. Those stories, we learn them, we adopt them in our hearts to be true. And that's dangerous. Because if that's the way we understand stories, we'll never understand the morals that we need to. And I know that you grasp these morals better than most. That's why you do what you do, and I'm here to thank you for what you do. On behalf of the people that you serve, I had a city council meeting last night. It was a 5-hour affair, stretched till 11 o'clock at night. It was a 4.5-hour drive to get here, so I got in at around 3:30 this morning. Now, I wouldn't do that for just any crowd. I did that because I wanted to be here to thank you in person, because the people that are actually responsible for my story, most of them I don't even know their names. I'll tell you my true story now, the real story. My father was a Navy veteran and a black man who lived in inner city Tampa in the 80s. Now, statistics would tell you that odds are he's likely to have a substance abuse problem. He's a black man in the 80s, straight out of the service. Sure enough, that's what happened. He was addicted to crack cocaine. His addiction drove my family into poverty and homelessness. His stints in jail and rehab cost him and cost my family a great deal. My mother was our rock. She worked even while we were living in our cars and in those shelters and raising the 4 of us. She worked 2 jobs at least every single day of my entire life, and she continues to work 2 jobs today. My grandparents, my mother's parents, were government workers, that is to say, school teachers. In a state in which retired school teachers don't live lavishly, but yes, they do have a pension, and that pension doesn't afford them boats and mansions, but it gives them enough that when their daughter and her 4 kids need to move into the basement, they can afford to put carpet on the floor, they can afford to buy a space heater for the 5 of us, they can afford to help us with food and with clothes so that we can go to school without being ashamed of what we're wearing. And the school that we went to, staffed again with government workers, yes, school bus drivers who picked us up, regardless of what house we came walking out of. They were there to pick us up and bring us to a school that saw the wisdom in giving us a free lunch, not as a handout, but because we couldn't focus on our math homework without it. And it was full of a school of teachers who would inspire me and push me and motivate me and teach me in spite of myself and in spite of my best efforts to sabotage myself. They would ensure that I learned the lessons that I needed to learn. Remember in math class, Mr. Leinbach taught me calculus. I want to say, too, I want to make another announcement here. I'm very proud of this. 9 years, this year, I am 9 years, I have not used calculus once. Thank you. Thank you. So, there ought to be a chip for that. Get a 9-year chip. Never used it once, but I'll tell you what he did teach me. He would penalize you. He would take points off your test. If you erased a mistake, if you scribbled it out, he would deduct you even if you arrived at the right answer. He said, put 1 line through your work. You know why? Because you can learn from your mistakes. I learned that. I learned in band, one of the first things that's always up for cuts when we talk about fixing our school budgets. I learned in band that I was a drummer, and I was a very enthusiastic drummer. And I remember my first lesson, we played through a song, and I just gave it everything I had. Just really wailing away on this drum. And afterwards, my instructor, I said, didn't I play well? And he said, you played loud. He said, sometimes, it's not about being the loudest person in the room. Sometimes by blending in, harmonizing with others, you can actually get further. I learned from my soccer coach, Coach Rodriguez, who would make us run wind sprints until we dropped, right? In the heat of August in New York, we'd run wind sprints for an hour. And from that, I learned that I do not like soccer. I don't. It's not a lot of fun. But there's wisdom in that too, even knowing what you're good at and what you're not. And I learned from my brothers and my sisters, I learned humility. My oldest brother was a very good athlete, very talented. He still holds every record, every conceivable football record in my school to this day. Touchdowns, receptions, interceptions, you name it. And I remember I did very well on a standardized test, so I called him and I told him, and because he's my brother and because he loved me, he was not impressed. He said, well, okay, nerd, but why don't you call me when you have 1,000 people in front of you cheering just for you? So I have my camera here. Would it be... And I like to ask for a favor. His name is Macau. If all 1,300 of you could do me a favor, if you could just wave and say, hi, Macau. Hi, Macau. Yeah, ready? 1, 2, 3. Hi, Macau. Terrific. Ma'am, you were blinking. I think we're going to need to... and without them, there's no way I would have made it out of high school, much less into college. And true enough, I went to college, and I did work 3 part-time jobs all the way through school. And those 3 part-time jobs combined paid me about $15,000 a year. And I went to Cornell University. Now, I'll ask you this. If you make $15,000 a year, do you know how short you're going to be at Cornell University? Very short. That's not going to cut it. It didn't cut it. The only way I made it through is because of New York State and its wisdom saw fit to offer TAP awards, TAP grants, to students who need to go to college. The federal government did the same. Right? My aunt co-signed a loan. Alumni, people who I've never met, people who have never met me, people who have no personal stake in my success, gave so that I had a chance, a shot at an education. And sure enough, when I ran for office, it was not because of a groundswell of support, but it was because of a community in need, and a community that said, we need you, but guess what? You're going to need us if you're elected. We can do what we need you to do, and we can do it together if you'll just be the tip of the spear. That's a bit more complicated a story to tell. That's the story of all of us together, the story of the school bus drivers, the retired teachers, the current teachers, the state assemblies, right? The federal government, the alumni, my mother, my grandparents, my brothers and sisters. It's less inspiring, maybe, but it's more hopeful. And more importantly, it has the right moral, the right lesson, which is that there is no such thing as a self-made man. Self-made men are made by each and every one of you. What you do every day by giving people stability, by giving them a chance, and yes, a second chance, and a third chance, and a fourth one. By giving them a chance, you make those self-made men and women. You create them. That's the true story, is that there are no individual successes. And once you start to understand and internalize that, and once we can get our policymakers, our leaders, to understand that same message, they'll see that yes, the person on drugs is not only their responsibility and their obligation, but it is their fault. Just like those success stories are to their credit, those who fail are the fault of every single one of us. Those who are homeless, that lies on our hearts and our consciousness. It is up to us. Like we build every success, we also build every failure. It's the true story that links us all. I had a chance to go to California with my roommate, who's a county legislator. He served for 6 years. He's 28 years old now, so he's getting on in years. And he took me to his home, and he took me to see the redwood trees in California. Have you ever seen these? It's a wonder of it's like Manhattan. They're huge, right? These trees stretch into the sky. They're the tallest trees in the world. And I told him, I said, these trees must have, you literally can't even see the tops. I said, these trees must have roots that go halfway to the center of the earth. Roots to support these trees must be so deep. And he said, the truth is, the roots are very shallow. They barely even break the soil. Many places you can see them rising up out of the ground. They don't go down barely at all because they go out. They interlock with the roots of the trees around them. That's how they get stability. That's how they get strength. The only way we can go up and achieve great heights is by leaning on those around us. That's the truth, that we're locked in this web. There's no success except community success, and there's no failure but community failure. So I want to thank you on behalf of the people you serve, because I was served by people just like you. I'll never see their faces, and I'll never know their names. They don't know that I'm giving this speech right now, and they don't know that the reason I'm standing here is because of them. I won't have an opportunity to go to their homes, to speak with their children and tell them that your mother and your father, when they were at work, this is what they were doing. This is who they were building. They were great people. You are great people. And the life of service that you're leading is to be applauded. As much as any of those great individual men and women of history, the Dr. Kings, the Abraham Lincolns, the George Washingtons, you are in their veins, even if your stories won't be told in the history books, because you are building the future. You are building better people. You are building America, and for that I thank you so much. Thank you.